Sergeant Lee turns his head to him, seeing his reaction, and asks him if he has anything to say. The corporal brushes it off and says he doesn't. The sergeant tells him he's right, he doesn't have anything to say because he shouldn't. Leaving the corporal embarrassed in front of his juniors as he walks away. It's evening time. Dongjin and Minjun are standing outside, cleaning and conversing. They talk about Sergeant Lee receiving a double promotion. Dongjin tells Minjun that Sergeant Lee was a special case since he had the highest grade in the advancement exams. He continues telling Minjun that the 2-ranked promotion has now been made unavailable. It turns out that a staff sergeant who got it caused an accident in a dungeon. Sergeant Lee was the last case of this double-ranked promotion. Minjun wonders if there are ways to get special advancements, and Dongjin tells him that there are exceptions like rescuing a civilian during an emergency. There are also achieving outstanding accomplishments in a monster hunt, but they're all subjective cases. He tells Minjun to forget that the regulation even exists as there have been next to no hunters who have advanced with it. Minjun acknowledges that while realizing that subjective means the commander will have the final say. He's quite desperate for advancement at this point. He doesn't wish danger on civilians, but it's as if he's almost disappointed that it seems to be too quiet here, even though they said monsters appear at the border on a daily basis since the army of North Korea had been wiped out. Minjun then begins to think about how 2 days' experience was enough experience of being a private for him and that he wanted to advance already. Dongjin tells him that since he was doing well now he was sure he will be promoted soon, but Minjun wasn't paying attention to him. As they talk, Minjun wishes for a gate to appear, and just as he thinks that there is an alarming call all over the camp. The broadcast comes from the control center, shouting out that it was an emergency alert, informing everyone that a significant number of middle bat monsters have appeared at an oil reserve. They instruct all hunters to gather at the oil reserve immediately and install the protective shield. Dongjin tells Minjun that they're going, and Minjun has a huge smile on his face. Middle bats are child-sized bat monsters that live in colonies. Individually they do not pose a great threat, but they are especially agile. On top of it they can spit out fireballs from their mouths, so their appearance at the oil reserve might be the next 4th of July, as their attacks could lead to the whole military camp being blown away like fireworks. There are 2 soldiers standing guard at the oil reserve, and the bats begin to come at them. One of them yells out wondering how many there were. One of the soldiers points his gun at the monster, but another soldier stops him from shooting, as they were not supposed to shoot near the oil reserve, and he tells him that they might start attacking if he shoots at them, and that could compromise the oil reserve. The soldier questions this decision, asking if he doesn't shoot, then is he just supposed to watch the monsters? The other soldier is smarter, telling him that they should observe since they aren't approaching. He tells him that since the bats haven't approached the oil reserve yet they should observe the situation first, as the issue has also been reported, which means a squad with a protective shield is on its way. The soldier with the itchy trigger finger asks what happens if the monsters light up the oil reserve before the protective shield is put up, making his comrade feel super nervous. They imagine an incredibly huge explosion that would devour the entirety of the military camp, as if Christopher Nolan was filming here for the new Oppenheimer movie. They are mortified and start panicking, wondering what they should do and why the middle bats showed up there of all places. Finally, Minjun comes walking in, stating that he will draw their attention. They are surprised to see a newbie being this bold and asked if he was the newbie from the second company. He starts walking towards the middle bats, and they scream at him to fall back since he doesn't have any equipment, but Minjun ignores their calls as ain't nobody got that for equipment while walking to the bats calmly with his hands in his pockets. He's looking at the middle bats as precious guests who will help him advance quicker. Not only will he get the title of the private who single-handedly stopped an emergency that could have wiped out the entire military camp, but he will also gain a ton of experience points. But how is that possible, he thought as he slowly unleashes demonic energy from his hand. He thinks of the Cyclops and remembers that monsters are attracted to his demonic energy. The middle bats definitely notice his aura and start circling around him right away. He smiles at how perfectly it worked out, as those bastards were definitely reacting to his demonic energy. He looks up and smiles, thinking that all the bats were now his. There's a squadron carrying a large crate rushing towards the oil reserve, yelling at each other to make sure that the equipment doesn't get damaged. But suddenly they come to a halt as Dongjin is completely stunned, and soon the others were stunned as well. Sergeant Lee looks at the idiots just standing there and tells them to install the shield immediately. They are so stunned that they have trouble speaking. They eventually snap out of it and tell him that Private Kim Minjun is fighting all of the bats single-handedly without any equipment. Sergeant Lee couldn't give a damn and shouted at the recruits to deploy the shields as their private was drawing all of the bats' attention. Meanwhile, Minjun was just ripping the bats one by one as it screams from having their wings torn apart. He wipes his sweat and realizes that it's taking too long to rip them apart individually and wondered if there was anything useful. He hears Sergeant Lee's voice behind him calling him a crazy effer. Sergeant Lee is running towards him and telling him to lower his stance and fall back. He continues to yell at Minjun for doing what he was doing without a bulletproof vest, but Minjun ignores what Sergeant Lee said as he just wants all of those experience points. He notices that Sergeant Lee has a baton in his hand, and that catches Minjun's attention quite well as he thought of it as something fun. He uses his demonic energy on Sergeant Lee's stomach. Sergeant Lee doesn't realize it and thinks that his stomach is acting up. Minjun approaches him pretending to be worried about him. He asks to borrow the baton from him before taking it by himself and telling the sergeant that he'll be back in a moment. He activates the baton and sees electricity flowing everywhere. He compares it to an electric fly swatter or like Nightwing's weapon. Minjun's smile widens as he knows fun times are starting. He rushes back into battle with his shock baton ready to rip those middle bats apart. He's taking out multiple bats in one hit, and he's having an absolute blast in doing so. Sergeant Lee is just standing there, looking at him with an expression of pure unfiltered surprise. He realizes that Minjun is simply overpowering every single one of those middle bats as we see him destroying them. Minjun was now the monster and the bats were his victims. There are two soldiers carrying equipment, and they notice a bat flying above them. The bat was looking directly at the oil reserve with its face lit up as the soldiers could only stare at it from below. The bat has a nasty look on its face as it looks directly at the oil reserve. Its mouth is foaming with flames, and its eyes glowing red with violence. Sergeant Lee orders the boys to fire at the bat, and if something happens, he promises to take full responsibility. They are ready to shoot, aiming the gun at the flying creature. Suddenly, they stop and start staring in confusion up in the air. Behind the middle bat, Minjun appears with a smile on his face and the shock baton in his hand, telling it that if it plays with fire, you will get burned, and in one quick strike, he overpowers the bat. Electricity fizzles throughout the sky as Minjun's shock baton connects with the monster. Meanwhile, the squad below him is left wondering how he even got there, but what's more important is how high he had jumped. The troops then successfully install the protective shield. The shield is activated, and they all gather around it while collecting the middle bat corpses. Someone calls out to Sergeant Lee. He quickly looks back and salutes. The soldier with the armband then asks where the bats came from as they didn't detect them on the radar. He waves the smell away from his face due to the smell of the roasted bats, commenting about who barbecued them so well and how many were there. Sergeant Lee replies that there was 30 and thought of who this commander was. The commander was operations officer on duty called Captain Song Junshik. Even if he doesn't specialize in combat, it was not fine for an awakened executive to be absent during an emergency and show up only after it's been resolved. Sergeant Lee thought about how Captain Song was probably watching the monster radar from the control center. The captain then kills his chain of thought and asks him if he was the one to roast those bats and that he would make sure to tell the battalion commander, but Sergeant Lee tells him that it wasn't him. Song was shocked to hear that as he knew that it has to be someone extremely skilled with the electric baton. The captain asks for the identity of the valiant fighter. Sergeant Lee tells him that all 30 bats were killed by a single soldier and to report it as such. The captain is shocked. He cannot believe that every single middle bat was killed by just one individual. Minjun walks up behind them as they're talking and tells Sergeant Lee that he came to return the baton he borrowed. He's holding a broken baton with wires popping out of it. With a nervous look on his face, he asks whether the baton was really expensive as Captain Song and Sergeant Lee stare at him. The next day, the battalion commander asked Minjun to be honest. He questions him on whether he had re-enlisted, to which Minjun replies that he did not. The commander then asked if he was a regressor or something, but Minjun tells him no with a firm expression on his face. The commander with a serious face then tells him not to do anything rash like what he did yesterday ever again. He warns Minjun that he might have been lucky this time, but as a hunter, he would never know what could happen the next time. Minjun remains silent, thinking that it wasn't luck, but decides to keep his mouth shut. The commander then informs him that the Hunter Corps was a special unit. It was different starting from the scale of divisions since they only consist of 4 battalions each. The battalions themselves are also composed of significantly fewer troops than in the regular military. Minjun thought that it was obvious because not all the awakened kept re-enlisting, but he wonders why the commander was talking about it right now. The commander then asks a question to Minjun, asking him if he knew how all of this was possible. This question grabs his attention. With his fist tightened and his face firm, the commander tells Minjun that it was because every single person within the Hunter Corps is awakened. But of course, it doesn't mean that every member of the Hunter Corps would engage in battle. As there were quite a few officers who specialized in administration, monster theory, tactics, and weapons research. A familiar face came to Minjun's mind as he realizes that what the commander said was true. The commander then stands up, telling Minjun that those who do office tasks were also awakened. And that in the Hunter Corps, you can only advance based on your accomplishments and talents. Minjun looks up to the commander, thinking that they had called him to the battalion commander's office first thing in the morning, which he thought meant a good thing, but instead, he was annoyed as it turns out to be some sort of info session, and thinking that he should have kept his expectations low. The commander then looks at Minjun, asking him if he was anticipating something since he was called to the battalion commander's office. He then tells Minjun to keep looking forward, which catches his attention. A car is seen speeding along the highway with medallions presented on the front of the car. Meanwhile, the commander tells Minjun that the hunter who had defeated the most monsters in the 104th Division was going to visit their battalion. The car comes to a stop before its door was open. A combat boot is seen stepping out of it, and a huge man with a beard had appear with soldiers surrounding him while saluting. 2nd Battalion Commander Colonel Lee Junbiam is seen saluting and shouting out to the top of his lungs, "Salute." A group of men is seen standing together in uniform precise who had looks of nervousness on their faces. The group comprises of 2nd Battalion 2nd Company Commander Captain Seo Jong-woon, 2nd Battalion Operations Officer Captain Song Junshik, 2nd Battalion 2nd Company 2nd Platoon Commander 2nd Lieutenant Kim Kielman, 2nd Battalion 2nd Company 2nd Platoon 2nd Squad Leader Sergeant Lee Sung-ho. A man gives Sergeant Lee Sung-ho a handshake. The man with the beard praises Sergeant Lee for calmly handling the situation yesterday. Sergeant Lee shouts out, "Thank you, sir." Minjun looks at the both of them and thought of Sergeant Lee being lively. He thought about how strong the 2-star from the Hunter Corps was. The man with the beard grabs onto Minjun's hand, asking him if he was Kim Minjun. Minjun immediately shouts out, "Private Kim Minjun, sir." "Yes, sir." Minjun was impressed by the grip strength of the man with the beard, as it was pretty strong. The man then slaps Minjun's back repeatedly with heavy hits and tells everyone to be at ease. They soon gathered in a room where he asks them if they had discovered which gate the middle bats had come from. The man beside Commander Du tells him that it was on a hill about 1.2 kilometers north of the battalion. They had restricted access to the area and are in the middle of investigating the gate's rank. Commander Du tells him that once it's confirmed, they needed to inform the division commander's office directly. He then looks at one of the commanders who was standing and asked him if he had mentioned that there was a problem with the radar. The commander tells Commander Du that the alarm had not gone off until the middle bats had approached the battalion, and that it was confirmed that the equipment did not malfunction, but they were currently checking to see if there were any blind spots. Commander Du then tells him that since it might not be an equipment malfunction and must have something to do with the sheer numbers of middle bats, he then informs him to report it to the Divisional Ordnance Office and to set up 2 more radars. The commander then shouts at the top of his lungs with sweat dripping down his face, "Yes, sir." Minjun was laughing in his mind upon seeing all the commanders being so tensed and thought it was great. The commander then turns to Minjun to praise him for his efforts against the middle bats, but tells him not to forget about bringing equipment with him next time. Minjun apologizes to the commander but thought that if he had brought equipment with him, he would have burned down the base instead. The commander then approaches Minjun while telling him that it was a joke and that he heard rumors about him eliminating 30 middle bats. Minjun tells him that it was true. The commander was impressed with the fact that Minjun had reacted fast enough, which prevented the oil reserve from exploding. The other commanders in the room were glad to see that Minjun and the commander were getting along well. The division commander then presented a small gift to Minjun by replacing his rank with an improved rank. The division commander congratulates him for his advancement and informs him that under regular circumstances, he would have to go through various procedures, but a soldier who achieves an exceptional accomplishment should be rewarded as soon as possible. Minjun then thanks the division commander for the promotion. The division commander then tells the battalion commander to award Minjun with a vacation immediately for 3 days and 2 nights. The battalion commander agrees straight away, which surprises Minjun as he didn't expect to advance this quickly. And on top of that, he would also be getting a vacation, which brings joy to his face. His military life was getting much more exciting. Minjun was soon being led by his senior, who turns around to thank Minjun for his accomplishments, as even he was commended as well. Minjun thanks him for the praise, to which he then asks him what he was going to do once he got outside, as it was the first time he was going home since enlistment. Minjun started to giggle over the idea he had in mind upon going home. Minjun could be seen walking fast back into town. He looks up at a signboard with the words PC, as his plan was to play Dungeon Power Fight in the PC room. He grins widely as he knew that even when he went home it would be a restricted area, which meant there was no internet connection. He walks towards the PC cafe, wanting to spend the next 3 days and 2 nights here without wasting any traveling time. Just as he was about to enter the PC cafe, a man suddenly appears, calling out to his friend. He complains about the fact that the soldiers were being stingy about him entering a cave to collect some pine mushrooms in the area. He tells his friend to give him a drink, as he explains that he had already obtained permission from the owner of the mountain and had even deposited money. His friend tells him that another friend called Changxian had gone to the mountain before it had been restricted and heard him say that it smelled toxic all over the mountain. He wipes his mouth, stating that Changxian had a headache for a few days afterward and that he would be in trouble if he goes there. But the friend tells him that he would wear a mask when he went there. But Minjun interrupts their talk, asking where the place was. The two friends were confused to hear that from Minjun. A truck is seen on a highway 200 meters away from Wachin. A voice asks Minjun if he could find his way from here, which he tells that he could. He thanks the driver for the ride, who tells him that they couldn't even go further due to the soldiers. He then asks Minjun if he could really resolve whatever it was on that mountain. Minjun tells him with confidence that the restriction should be lifted by tomorrow so that they could go on the mountain again. The friends then took a closer look at Minjun's rank on his chest. They decided to trust him and wave him goodbye, telling him to be careful and not to tell anyone about them. Minjun agrees and tells them to take care. He then looks at the mountain, which was filled with a purplish aura similar to his demonic powers. He thought about how he had come to Wachin instead of going to a PC room and recognized the familiar scent. He smiles as he sees the purple aura swirling in the air. He knew that it meant there was demonic energy. Soldiers with gas masks were seen stationed outside a cave entrance while holding onto guns. Minjun is seen hiding amongst the tree and notes that the security was rather heavy near the entrance to the mountain, but was quite loose near the dungeon itself. He then summons the demonic energy in his hand, wanting to avoid getting noticed since he had become a private first class. The demonic energy slowly creeps towards the soldiers guarding the entrance. They soon experience stomach aches together all of a sudden. They were surprised to see that both of them were experiencing the same thing at once. Since they both needed to urgently go poop, they decide to leave their post empty, knowing that no one would come to where they were stationed. Soon enough the entrance to the cave was empty, but only had demonic energy laying around. Minjun quickly enters the cave while the guards were doing toilet duty. He smiles upon feeling the immense demonic energy. He places his hand on the ground to do some recon, but soon realizes that he couldn't sense any monsters at all. But wondered why there was still demonic energy here. But he shows a grin as if he didn't care at all. An infinity logo is seen being made out of the demonic energy in his hands, which causes all the nearby demonic energy to flow toward him, allowing him to easily absorb everything. His demonic stats soon kept increasing by 1 point as time passes by. Soon a window appears above him, catching his attention. It states that since his demonic energy has reached the threshold, his skill called corruption has been enhanced. Another window states that since his demonic energy has reached the threshold, he had unlocked the skill called Night Walker. Minjun's face was filled with joy as he grins widely while staring at the notification window. Thanks for watching the latest part from the voice of Manhwa. Subscribe for more content and don't forget to comment below what you want to see in the future. Like and share for more.